Thank you for joining me for today's craft from the Makery, hosted in August 2021. For today's craft, we are going to do a Chicago Skyline melted oil pastel project with some black acrylic paint. We had a limited number of kits available for pickup at the drive-up window, and if you were able to get a kit, it included most of the supplies you needed, including a pre-painted 6-inch by 8-inch canvas, a pre-cut stencil with the Chicago Skyline, a piece of transfer tape, a bag of oil pastels, a little bit of black acrylic paint and a foam brush, and a popsicle stick. We will be melting the oil pastels, so for today's video we are using a heat gun. You can also use a hair dryer. So these are all the supplies and equipment you need. So let's get started. The first thing we are going to do is take the stencil vinyl and transfer it onto the canvas. If you are able to pick up a craft kit, your kit includes a canvas that has already been painted and a pre-cut stencil vinyl. We painted the canvas using spray paint, blue sky colored spray paint, and we sprayed it to kind of give a cloudy sky effect. The stencil vinyl was cut using the Cricut and the Silhouette machines. Stencil vinyl is a type of material that is used for painting, so it kind of has a plastic feel so it doesn't get soaked with the paint. And the back side of it is adhesive, so it will stick to your surface you're painting. So what we need to do is finish preparing this stencil to transfer onto the canvas. So to do that, we need to remove the portion of the skyline and the letterings for the word Chicago. You can either use your finger to kind of peel up and pull away that skyline, or if you're having a hard time, you can use a paper clip. So I'm just going to gently peel this away to make sure I don't rip other parts of my stencil. So this can be tossed away, or you can save it for another project. And then for the lettering, the word Chicago, I'm going to use my paper clip just because the lines are a little thinner and a little harder to grab at. And so this just lets me poke it up, so that way I can grab at it and pull away. You want to make sure you don't lose the centers of the lettering. So for instance, in the middle of the H, you want to make sure you don't lose that piece. So I've removed most of the lettering, but I accidentally pushed some of the parts out of the way. So I'm going to gently move them back into place where they're supposed to be. So now I have my stencil ready. So the parts that are white are the parts we're going to color in onto the canvas. So the next step is to take the transfer tape, and if you were able to get a craft kit, this was included. And this is just a big piece of tape, and what we're going to do is peel the tape off. This white piece can be discarded, and this is just one giant piece of tape, so you want to take the adhesive side, the sticky side, and stick it on top of the surface of your vinyl, and you want to cover your entire vinyl piece. And what we're going to do, now that that tape is stuck to your vinyl, you're going to use it to peel off your entire stencil in one piece. You do want to be careful that when you get to the letters, you don't lose pieces, so you want to slow down and maybe go back. You can see I'm kind of losing the A there, so the G. So I'm going to go back to make sure it sticks to the tape. And this piece can be discarded. And you should have your stencil stuck to your piece of transfer tape. So now what we can do is, with the stencil side on the bottom, we can line this up with our canvas and stick the stencil to the canvas. And you want to push it down, get any bubbles out or any wrinkles. Kind of the same process as before. You want to peel that tape off. So the tape comes off and the stencil you want to keep stuck to your canvas. And you want to go slow to make sure you're not losing any parts in your lettering. And this bottom piece is just to line it up, so you can actually tear this off if you want. And so there we have our stencil prepped onto the canvas. So now that our stencil vinyl is stuck to our canvas, we're ready to color in our skyline. We're going to color in the skyline using oil pastels, and we're going to melt them into the canvas. One of the nice perks to this technique is that by melting it in, the oil pastels will fill in the texture gaps of the canvas. So it's going to create a more filled in, solid look than if we just were to color them in. There's actually two techniques you can use to melt your oil pastels. You are going to need some sort of heat source. So I'm using a heat gun today, but you can also use a hair dryer. If you're using a hair dryer, you want to use the high temperature setting, but the low fan setting. And so what you're going to do, the first method that you can use is to heat the oil pastels above your canvas and let the melted oils drip onto your canvas. And so this creates a dripped effect. And so that's what I'm going to do first, just to show you. So I'm going to remove the label for my pastel. I'm going to hold it above my canvas, and this requires making sure you're aiming for where it's going to fall. And I'm going to turn this on and let it heat. And so you can see there, I let it heat until it started to drip, and I let it fall onto my canvas. One of the downsides to this technique is it does take a little bit longer. It's a little bit harder to aim, so you can see that I got a lot of red pastels on my stencil and not on my canvas. And it does use up a little bit more oil pastels than the other method, which I'm going to show you right now. So the other method you can do is you can take your oil pastels and you can color in the canvas. And I'm going to do the rainbow effect because I have all the colors of the rainbow. So I'm starting with red here, and then orange, yellow, light green, dark green, light blue, and dark blue. And so what I'm going to do is just heavily color this in. And this is where the popsicle stick comes into play. So after I color it in, I can heat up my canvas. And what you'll start noticing is as you heat it, it's going to melt and fill into those gaps. Something to be aware of, the oil pastels cool really quickly, so you kind of need to do this fast. But we're gonna heat this up again. And we're going to push the melted pastels into the canvas. So you can see here that I let the oils pastels heat until they started to melt. And I basically used my popsicle stick like a paintbrush. And I pushed the melted oil pastels around the canvas to kind of fill in the gaps so it becomes a solid color instead of having these little bubbles everywhere. So I'm going to do that for the rest of my canvas. And so there we go. So I have all of my oil pastels melted. I've pushed them into my canvas. I don't have a lot of white specks, but in areas where it looks a little lighter, I could go back and add more oil pastels if I wanted to. And then just something to keep in mind that the colors can end up mixing together. So you want to make sure you're being mindful that you're not mixing colors unless you're doing it intentionally. So for instance, you could mix your red and blue together if you're trying to get purple. So now we are going to set our oil pastels aside and put our heat gun away. And the last thing we're going to do is color in our Chicago with a little bit of black acrylic paint and your foam brush. So you just need a little bit. There's not a lot in your cup. And you're going to get your foam brush soaked with your paint, and you're going to paint in the letters. And so once you have a solid layer of black paint painted in, you're going to want to let this dry until the paint is completely dry. You can add a second layer of paint if you want. The benefit of having a second layer is it will help that paint pop a little bit more. So it's going to cover the canvas with a more solid layer. So we're going to let this dry. If you want to add a second layer of paint after it dries, you can do so. But just make sure that you let it dry again before you remove the stencil. So my black acrylic has dried, and I have all of my oil pastels melted in. So now I can remove this stencil. So we're just going to peel from one of the corners. And so that's the Skyline. And so the only thing we have to do is go into our lettering and remove some of those centers of the letters. And I'm using the paper clip to do this. And so there's my Chicago. And the only thing I'm missing is some of the antennas on some of the buildings. So you can add these or leave them out. The tallest building here is the Sears Tower or the Willis Tower. So if you want, you can grab a Sharpie and you can add 2 antennas on the top of that. And there's also supposed to be antennas on the John Hancock building over here. And on this building. And so those are optional, you don't need them, but there you have your finished Chicago Skyline canvas. So hopefully if you followed along with all the steps, you should have a finished Chicago Skyline canvas with melted oil pastels and black acrylic for the lettering. If you liked the way yours turned out, you can post about it and show us on social media. And you can tag us at AskElmhurst or hashtag ElmhurstMakery. I hope you enjoyed this craft and thank you for joining me. Have a nice day.